The dust cloud rose behind the wagon train like a prayer to heaven that would never be answered. And Adelaide Voss knew her time was running out before they left her completely behind. Her feet ached something fierce, bleeding through the worn leather of her boots as she stumbled over another rock on the unforgiving Montana Trail. It was June 1876, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the ragged line of pioneers making their way west toward Montana City. Adelaide had been walking behind the wagons for 3 days now, ever since Mrs. Henderson had declared her unfit to ride after catching her sharing water with a Shoshone woman they had passed on the trail. Savages and those who sympathize with them walk, Mrs. Henderson had said, her thin lips pressed together in righteous fury. We have no room for Indian lovers in decent company. Adelaide had tried to explain that the woman had been dying of thirst, that her small child had been crying, but Mrs. Henderson was the wagon master's wife, and her word was law. So Adelaide walked, her few possessions strapped to her back, choking on the dust kicked up by the 20 wagons ahead of her. The other travelers had stopped looking back at her. She had become invisible, a ghost trailing behind their hopes and dreams. She was 22 years old and alone in the world. Her parents had died of cholera 2 years back in Ohio, and she had been working as a seamstress in Chicago until the advertisement for teachers in the Montana Territory had caught her eye. A new start, a new life, a chance to matter to someone again. But now she wondered if she would even make it to Montana City alive. The wagon train had made it clear they would not wait for stragglers. Adelaide stumbled again, catching herself on her hands, feeling the sharp sting as gravel bit into her palms. She pushed herself up slowly, her vision swimming from heat and exhaustion. The wagons were pulling further ahead. She could barely make out the last one now through the dust and her own tears of frustration. That was when she heard the hoofbeats. At first she thought it was one of the outriders, the men who scouted ahead and around the wagon train for danger. But the sound was coming from behind her, not from the direction of the wagons. Adelaide turned, shading her eyes against the brutal afternoon sun. A lone rider approached at an easy gallop, his silhouette dark against the endless blue Montana sky. As he drew closer, Adelaide could make out details. A tall man on a paint horse, wearing a dusty brown hat and a dark shirt. His face was shadowed, but there was something purposeful in the way he rode directly toward her. Adelaide's heart hammered. Out here, a lone woman was vulnerable to all kinds of dangers. She had heard the stories around the campfires at night, whispered warnings about outlaws and worse. She looked toward the wagon train, but they were too far now, disappearing over a rise in the landscape. The rider slowed as he approached, bringing his horse to a stop about 10 feet from where Adelaide stood frozen. Now she could see his face clearly. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with strong features bronzed by the sun and eyes the color of sage. Dark hair curled from beneath his hat, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. He sat his horse like he had been born in the saddle. "You are with that wagon train." His voice was deep, with a hint of concern that surprised her. Adelaide found her voice, though it came out hoarse from dust and disuse. "Yes, I am." His eyes, sharp and assessing, took in her dusty dress, her bleeding hands, the pack on her back that had rubbed her shoulders raw. His jaw tightened. "They make you walk, behind the wagons where you breathe nothing but dust." Adelaide did not know how to explain without sounding like she was complaining. There was a disagreement about wagon space. The cowboy's expression darkened. He looked toward the distant wagons, then back at her. "How long have you been walking?" 3 days. Something flashed in his eyes, hot and bright as lightning. 3 days. He repeated it like a curse. Then, before Adelaide could react, he urged his horse forward and extended his hand down to her. "No more. Come up." Adelaide stared at his outstretched hand. It was large, calloused, strong. I don't even know you. Name is Porter Garrett. I have a ranch about 15 miles north of Montana City. I was in Bozeman selling horses and I am heading home. Now you know me." He kept his hand extended, steady as stone. "And I know enough to see that leaving a woman to walk in this heat with no water is not just unchristian, it is plain cruelty. Come on. My horse can carry us both easily." "They will be angry," Adelaide said, but even as she spoke, she was reaching for his hand. She was so tired, so thirsty, and this stranger's eyes held more kindness than she had seen in 3 days from people who claimed to be good Christians. Let them be angry. Porter's hand closed around hers, warm and solid, and then with startling ease he lifted her up. Adelaide gasped as she suddenly found herself seated sideways in front of him on the saddle, his arm around her waist to steady her. She could feel the heat of him at her back, smell horse and leather and sage. "Hold on," he said quietly, and then they were moving. Porter guided his horse into an easy lope, quickly eating up the distance to the wagon train. Adelaide clutched at the saddle horn, acutely aware of how close she was to this stranger, of how improper this was. But propriety seemed less important than the relief flooding through her exhausted body. As they caught up to the last wagon, faces began to turn. Adelaide saw shock, disapproval, and calculation in those faces. Porter slowed his horse to match the wagon train's pace, positioning himself near the front where the wagon master rode his own mount. Mr. Henderson was a heavy man with a florid face and mutton chop sideburns. He turned at the sound of Porter's horse and his eyes widened, then narrowed as he took in the scene. "What is the meaning of this?" Henderson demanded. "That woman is part of our train. She has no business riding with strangers." "The meaning," Porter said, his voice calm but with an edge that could cut glass, "is that I found a woman walking alone behind your wagons in country where Sioux hunting parties have been spotted, in heat that could kill a strong man, with no water and bleeding feet. So I offered her a ride on my horse, which is what any decent human being would do. That woman violated the rules of our company," Mrs. Henderson called out from her position on the wagon seat. "She consorted with savages. She chose to walk." "I gave water to a dying woman and her child," Adelaide said, her voice stronger now with Porter's solid presence behind her. "That is all I did." Porter's arm tightened slightly around her waist, a gesture of support. "So your rules say to let people die of thirst." "Interesting Christianity you practice, madam." Mrs. Henderson's face flushed red. "How dare you judge us? We have to maintain order, maintain standards. If we allow one person to break the rules, chaos follows." "The chaos I see," Porter said evenly, "is in forcing a woman to walk until she collapses while you ride in comfort. That does not sit well with me." He looked at Mr. Henderson. "I am taking Miss—" He paused, realizing he did not know her name. "Adelaide Voss," she supplied quietly. "I am taking Miss Voss to Montana City. She can ride with me, arrive in comfort and safety, rather than walking in your dust or riding in your company where she is clearly not welcome." Porter's tone made it clear this was not a request or a negotiation. "Now see here," Henderson blustered. "You cannot just take one of our party. She paid for passage, and there are rules about young, unmarried women traveling with men who are not their kin." "Did she pay to walk behind the wagons breathing dust?" Porter asked. "Or did she pay for safe passage? Because from what I see, you are not providing that." He shifted in the saddle. "As for propriety, I imagine my mother and sisters will be perfectly good chaperones when we reach my family's ranch, which is directly on the route to Montana City. Miss Voss can rest there, recover from your hospitality, and then continue to town with us when my mother makes her weekly trip for supplies. That is 2 days from now. Adelaide's mind was spinning. She knew she should be afraid, should protest, should insist on staying with the wagon train despite everything. But Porter's words made sense, and more than that, something in her trusted him. Perhaps it was foolish, perhaps she would regret it, but she was so tired of being treated as less than human by people who claimed moral superiority. "I will go with Mr. Garrett," she said clearly. "Thank you for your escort this far, Mr. Henderson. But I believe I will be safer and more comfortable completing my journey another way." Henderson looked like he wanted to argue, but several of the other men in the train were watching with expressions that suggested they were not entirely comfortable with how Adelaide had been treated. Bad word of mouth could ruin a wagon master's reputation, and they all knew it. "Fine," Henderson spat. "But when you regret this decision, do not come crying to us. You made your choice." "I did," Adelaide agreed, "and I am at peace with it." Porter did not wait for more argument. He touched his heels to his horse's sides, and they moved forward, passing the wagon train with smooth, easy strides. Adelaide felt the eyes of the travelers on her back as they left the dusty column behind, but she did not look back. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon train's noise fading behind them until there was only the sound of hoofbeats, the creak of leather, and the wind moving through the grass. The Montana landscape stretched out around them in rolling hills covered with sage and wildflowers, with the distant mountains blue on the horizon. "Thank you," Adelaide finally said, her voice soft. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did." Porter's voice was firm. "I have 3 sisters. If any of them were being treated that way, I would hope someone would step in." He paused. "Are you really heading to Montana City? For what purpose, if you do not mind my asking?" "I was hired to be a teacher. They are building a new schoolhouse and needed someone educated who was willing to come west." Adelaide felt herself relaxing slightly in the saddle, her body adjusting to the rhythm of the horse. "I studied at a women's college in Ohio. When my parents died, I needed to find a way to support myself. Teaching seemed like a good choice, and Montana seemed like an adventure." "Some adventure," Porter said dryly. "Walking behind wagons until you collapse." "That was not part of the plan," Adelaide admitted. She hesitated, then added, "I am not an Indian lover as Mrs. Henderson claimed. I simply could not watch a woman and child die of thirst when I had water to share. It seemed like the human thing to do." "It was the human thing to do." Porter's voice was warm with approval. "Mrs. Henderson is the type who thinks cruelty is next to godliness, as long as she can justify it with scripture. The territory is full of people like that, unfortunately, but there are good people too. People who remember that we are all just trying to survive out here." They rode for another hour, and gradually Adelaide felt her guard lowering. Porter was easy to talk to, his presence steady and comforting rather than threatening. He pointed out landmarks, told her about the country they were passing through, and asked her about Ohio and Chicago and her studies. He seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts on books and education, which surprised her. Many men she had known thought women's education was frivolous. "My youngest sister Emily wants to go to college," Porter told her. "She reads everything she can get her hands on. My father says it is a waste, that she should focus on finding a husband, but my mother supports her. I do too. I figure the more educated people are, the better decisions they make." "That is a progressive viewpoint for a cattleman," Adelaide observed. Porter laughed. a warm sound that seemed to vibrate through where her back pressed against his chest. "I suppose it is. But I have seen enough stupidity in my life to appreciate intelligence when I find it, regardless of whether it comes from a man or a woman." The sun was starting to lower in the sky when Porter pointed ahead. "There. That is Garrett land. Our ranch is another few miles in that valley." Adelaide looked where he was pointing and saw fence lines, grazing cattle, and in the distance, buildings clustered near a line of cottonwood trees that suggested water. It looked substantial, prosperous, nothing like the rough homestead she had imagined. "Your family has done well," she said. "My father came out in '49 during the gold rush, but he had enough sense to realize that land and cattle were better investments than chasing gold. He filed claims, bought out other people's claims when they gave up, and built something lasting. It is a good life, if you do not mind hard work." Porter's voice held pride but not arrogance. "My brother Peter and I run most of the cattle operation now. Father's health is not what it was." As they approached the ranch buildings, Adelaide could see more details. There was a large main house, built of logs and stone with a wide porch. Nearby were a barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. Chickens scratched in a yard and laundry hung on a line, snapping in the breeze. It looked like a home, lived in and loved. A woman emerged from the house as they rode up, shading her eyes against the sun. She was tall and slim, with dark hair pinned up and an apron over her dress. When she saw Porter, her face lit up with a smile. "Porter, you are back early. We did not expect you until tomorrow." Then her gaze landed on Adelaide and her eyebrows rose. "And you have brought a guest." Porter swung down from his horse with easy grace, then reached up to help Adelaide down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, 3 days of walking followed by hours in the saddle taking their toll. Porter's hand steadied her instantly. "Easy. You are exhausted." He kept one hand on her elbow as he turned to the woman. "Mother, this is Miss Adelaide Voss. She is the new teacher heading to Montana City. Or she was until the wagon train she was traveling with decided she should walk behind the wagons for 3 days as punishment for showing basic human kindness to a Shoshone woman. I found her on the trail and offered her alternative transportation." Mrs. Garrett's expression shifted from curiosity to outrage in an instant. "They made you walk for 3 days." She moved forward, taking in Adelaide's dusty clothes, her sunburned face, her bloody hands. "Oh, you poor dear, come inside immediately. You need water, food, and medical attention for those hands. Porter, bring her things, and unsaddle your horse yourself. This takes precedence." Before Adelaide could protest, she found herself being ushered into the house by a woman who radiated maternal competence and fury at the treatment Adelaide had received. The interior of the house was cool and dim after the bright sunshine, and Adelaide had an impression of comfortable furniture, rag rugs, and the smell of bread baking. Mrs. Garrett guided her to a chair at a large wooden table and immediately began pumping water into a basin. "I am Margaret Garrett, and you are welcome in our home for as long as you need to stay. What those people did to you is unconscionable." She brought the basin over along with clean cloths. "Let me see those hands." Adelaide extended her torn, bloody palms and Mrs. Garrett made a soft sound of distress. "Porter did right to bring you here. These need to be cleaned and bandaged." She worked with gentle efficiency, washing away the grit and blood, then applying some kind of salve that stung but immediately felt soothing. Porter came in carrying Adelaide's pack, followed by a younger woman who looked to be about 16, with the same dark hair and sage-green eyes as Porter. She stopped in her tracks when she saw Adelaide. "Who is this?" "Emily. Meet Miss Adelaide Voss." She is the new teacher for Montana City, and she will be staying with us for a few days. Porter set down Adelaide's pack. Miss Voss, my sister Emily. Emily's eyes widened. The teacher. Oh, thank goodness. I was afraid they would not find anyone and the school would not open. Everyone says we are too far out for educated people to want to come. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from Adelaide, studying her with open curiosity. What did you study? Where are you from? Do you know Latin? Emily, let the poor woman breathe, Mrs. Garrett chided, but her tone was affectionate. She has been through an ordeal and needs rest, not an interrogation. It is all right, Adelaide said, finding herself smiling despite her exhaustion. Emily's enthusiasm was refreshing after days of cold silence. I studied literature, history, mathematics, and yes, some Latin. I am from Ohio originally and most recently from Chicago. Chicago, Emily breathed. What was it like? I have never been anywhere bigger than Helena. Before Adelaide could answer, two more people entered the house. An older man who had to be Mr. Garrett and a young man who looked so much like Porter that they could only be brothers. Both stopped and stared at Adelaide. We have a guest, it seems, Mr. Garrett observed. Porter explained the situation again, while Mrs. Garrett finished bandaging Adelaide's hands. Adelaide watched the family's reactions. Mr. Garrett's face grew stern with disapproval at the wagon train's treatment of her, while Porter's brother, who she learned was named Peter, looked openly angry. That is barbaric, Peter said flatly. He was slightly shorter than Porter, stockier, with lighter hair but the same strong features. You should report that wagon master to the authorities in Montana City. Treatment like that should not be tolerated. I just want to put it behind me, Adelaide said quietly. I am grateful to your brother for his intervention and to all of you for your hospitality. I do not want to cause trouble. You are not causing trouble, Mrs. Garrett said firmly. Those people cause trouble by treating you abominably. Now, you are going to eat a proper meal, take a bath, and sleep in a real bed. In 2 days, when I make my weekly trip to town, you can ride in our wagon and arrive in Montana City clean, rested, and ready to take up your teaching position with dignity. Adelaide felt tears prickling her eyes at the kindness, so different from what she had experienced over the past days. Thank you. I do not know how to repay you. No repayment needed, Mr. Garrett said gruffly. We help people out here. It is how we all survive. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of warm food, gentle conversation, and overwhelming relief. Mrs. Garrett heated water for a bath, and Adelaide luxuriated in being clean for the first time in days. Emily loaned her a nightgown and a clean dress for the next day. When Adelaide finally climbed into a real bed in a small guest room, she felt like she might cry from sheer gratitude. She also could not stop thinking about Porter Garrett. The way he had lifted her onto his horse without hesitation, the solid strength of his presence behind her, the way his eyes had flashed with anger at her treatment. She barely knew him, but something in her responded to him in a way she had never experienced before. It was foolish, she told herself as she drifted off to sleep. She was here to teach, to build a new life for herself. She could not afford to develop feelings for a cowboy, no matter how kind his eyes or how gentle his hands had been when he helped her dismount. But as sleep claimed her, her last thought was of how safe she had felt in his arms on that horse, riding away from cruelty towards something that felt like hope. Adelaide woke to sunlight streaming through the window, and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from downstairs. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Then memory flooded back and she sat up quickly, wincing at the soreness in her body. Someone had left a basin of water on the dresser along with the borrowed dress from Emily, neatly laid out. Adelaide washed her face, changed out of the nightgown, and examined her bandaged hands. They were still sore but felt better than yesterday. Mrs. Garrett clearly knew her medicine. When Adelaide made her way downstairs, she found the family already at breakfast. Porter looked up as she entered, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you. A little sore, but nothing compared to yesterday." Adelaide accepted the chair Emily pulled out for her and the plate of food Mrs. Garrett immediately provided. "You have more color in your cheeks today," Mrs. Garrett observed with satisfaction. "That is good. You were pale as milk last night." She was pale because she had been walking in the sun for 3 days without proper water or rest, Porter said, an edge in his voice that suggested he was still angry about it. "I saw the wagon train's water barrels when we passed them. They had plenty. They were just being cruel." "Porter," his mother warned. "Miss Voss said she wants to put it behind her." "I know. I am sorry." Porter focused on his breakfast, but Adelaide could see the tension in his shoulders. Mr. Garrett cleared his throat. "Peter and I are riding out to check the north pasture today. Some of the fence needs repair before the cattle drift too far. Porter, you should stay here and rest after your trip to Bozeman." "I am not tired," Porter said. "I can help." "You can help by showing Miss Voss around the ranch," Mrs. Garrett interjected smoothly. "She has 2 days here. She might as well see something of the country besides the inside of our house. Besides, Emily has been pestering me all morning about wanting to talk to Miss Voss about books and education. You can take them both." Porter looked at his mother, then at Adelaide, and something passed between them that Adelaide could not quite read. Finally, he nodded. "If Miss Voss feels up to it." "I would like that," Adelaide heard herself say. "I have been traveling for weeks, seeing the country from a wagon or walking in dust. It would be nice to actually experience it properly." Emily clapped her hands together. "Oh, wonderful. Can we ride up to the ridge? The view is spectacular, and I want to show Miss Voss the wildflowers." So it was settled. After breakfast, Porter saddled 3 horses while Adelaide borrowed some of Emily's riding clothes. She had ridden before, though never regularly, and she was grateful when Porter brought out a gentle mare for her. "This is Daisy," he said, stroking the horse's neck. "She is steady and calm. She will take care of you." Adelaide mounted carefully, settling into the saddle with only a small wince from her sore muscles. Porter swung onto his paint gelding with easy grace, and Emily bounced in her saddle with barely contained excitement. They rode out from the ranch at an easy pace, heading toward higher ground. The morning was beautiful, the air clear and fresh, with meadowlarks singing from fence posts. Porter rode beside Adelaide, pointing out landmarks and explaining the ranch's operations, while Emily chattered about everything from her favorite books to her opinions on women's suffrage. "Father says I am too radical," Emily confided, "but I think women should have the vote. We are just as capable as men of making informed decisions, maybe more so, since we have to think about practical things like keeping families fed and children educated." "I agree," Adelaide said. "I was part of a suffrage society in Chicago. We held meetings and wrote letters to congressmen." Emily's eyes lit up. "Really? That is exactly what I want to do, but out here people think I am crazy. They say women's place is in the home taking care of men." "Some women want that, and that is fine," Adelaide said. "But others want more, want different, and that should be acceptable too." "The world is changing." Porter had been listening quietly. "For what it is worth, I agree with both of you. My mother runs half this ranch, makes most of the financial decisions, and is twice as smart as my father, though he would never admit it. Seems foolish to me to waste half the population's brains just because of their gender." Emily made a face at her brother. "You just want me to go to college so I stop bothering you about books." "That too," Porter agreed, but he was smiling. They reached the ridge Emily had mentioned, and Adelaide drew in a sharp breath. The view was stunning. Below them, the Garrett ranch spread out like a map, the buildings small and neat. Beyond that, the land rolled away in waves of green and gold, studded with cattle. In the distance, mountains rose like a wall, their peaks still white with snow despite the June warmth. "It is beautiful," Adelaide breathed. "It is," Porter agreed, but when Adelaide glanced at him, he was looking at her rather than the view. Emily had dismounted and was gathering wildflowers, leaving Adelaide and Porter alone for a moment. The silence between them was comfortable but charged with something Adelaide could not quite name. "Thank you again," she said quietly. "Not just for helping me yesterday, but for this. For treating me like a person worth spending time with, not just a charity case." Porter turned in his saddle to face her fully. "You are not a charity case, Adelaide. May I call you Adelaide?" "Yes." Her voice came out softer than she intended. "You are an educated, brave woman who made a hard choice to come west and teach children who desperately need someone like you. You showed compassion to people who needed it, and you were punished for basic human decency. That makes you admirable, not pitiable." His sage green eyes were intense on hers. "I am glad I found you on that trail, and not just because it was the right thing to do." Adelaide's heart was pounding. "Why else?" Porter opened his mouth to answer, but Emily came bounding back with an armful of flowers, her timing spectacularly terrible. "Look, Indian paintbrush and lupine and wild roses. Miss Voss, you must take some to your room. They will make it smell wonderful." The moment broke, but Adelaide felt shaken by it. Something was happening between her and Porter, something swift and powerful that both thrilled and terrified her. She barely knew him. This was only her second day at the ranch, but the connection she felt was undeniable. They rode back to the ranch as the sun climbed higher, the air warming to summer temperatures. Mrs. Garrett had cold lemonade waiting for them, and they sat on the porch in the shade, talking and laughing. Adelaide found herself relaxing in a way she had not since her parents died. This felt like family, like home, in a way Chicago never had. That afternoon, Emily convinced Adelaide to help her with some sewing while they talked about books. Porter and Peter had gone out to help their father with the fencing after all, and Mrs. Garrett was working in her kitchen garden. Emily peppered Adelaide with questions about college, about Chicago, about her travels, soaking up every word like thirsty ground drinking rain. "I want what you have," Emily said wistfully as she stitched a hem. "Independence, education, the ability to make my own choices." "You can have it," Adelaide assured her. "Times are changing. Women are going to college, becoming teachers and doctors and writers. It is hard and people will criticize you, but it is possible." "Will you help me?" Emily asked. "When you are settled in Montana City, will you help me prepare for college entrance examinations? Father might say no, but if I can prove I am serious and capable, maybe he will change his mind." "I would be honored," Adelaide said, and meant it. When the men returned at sunset, dusty and tired, Porter sought out Adelaide immediately. "Would you like to see the sunset from the bluff above the house? It is worth the short climb." Adelaide knew she should probably say no, that spending time alone with Porter was courting impropriety and potentially heartache, but she found herself nodding. "I would like that." They walked up a gentle slope behind the house to a rocky outcrop that overlooked the ranch and the valley beyond. The sun was just touching the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple that took Adelaide's breath away. "You were right," she said softly. "It is worth the climb." Porter stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I have been watching this sunset my whole life, and it never gets old. Every night is different." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the light change. Then Porter spoke, his voice low and careful. "Adelaide, I need to say something, and I hope you will not think me too forward or improper." Adelaide's heart raced. "What is it?" "I have only known you for a day, I understand that, but I have never felt this way about anyone before." Porter turned to face her, his expression earnest and a little uncertain. "From the moment I saw you on that trail, something shifted in me. And today, spending time with you, talking with you, seeing how Emily lights up around you, how my mother already treats you like family. I do not want you to go to Montana City in 2 days and disappear from my life." Adelaide could barely breathe. "Porter, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything yet. I know this is fast, probably too fast, but out here, life moves differently. We do not have the luxury of years-long courtships and formal dances." He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and gently took her bandaged hand in his. "I would like to court you properly. To visit you in Montana City, to take you to church socials and dances, to give you time to know me and decide if what I feel might be something you feel too." Adelaide looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. In the fading light, Porter looked both strong and vulnerable, and something in her chest cracked open. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I did not want to. I told myself it was foolish, that I was just grateful, that I was emotional from everything that happened. But when I look at you, I feel something I have never felt before." Porter's face transformed with a smile that was like sunrise. "Really, really." Adelaide found herself smiling back. "I would very much like you to court me, Porter Garrett." He lifted her bandaged hand gently and kissed the back of it, his lips warm against the fabric. "Then I will. And I will do it properly, so no one can say we rushed into anything without thought or care." They watched the last of the sunset together, hands joined, both feeling like something momentous and right had just begun. The next day passed in a strange mixture of anticipation and melancholy. Adelaide was eager to begin her new position in Montana City, but she found herself reluctant to leave the Garrett ranch. It had only been 2 days, but she already felt attached to this place and these people, especially to Porter. He found reasons to be near her throughout the day. Nothing improper, always with family around, but there was a new awareness between them that was almost tangible. Their eyes would meet across the dinner table, and something electric would arc between them. When he helped her onto a horse to ride out to see the cattle, his hands lingered at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. Emily noticed, of course. "You like my brother," she said that evening as they sat on the porch shelling peas for dinner. Adelaide felt her cheeks heat. "Is it that obvious? To me, yes, but I pay attention to people." Emily grinned. "I think it is wonderful. Porter has never looked at a woman the way he looks at you, and you would be perfect for him. You are smart and kind, and you do not giggle at everything he says the way Sarah Jennings does whenever he comes to town." "Who is Sarah Jennings?" Adelaide tried to keep her voice casual, but Emily laughed. "The banker's daughter. She has decided Porter should marry her, but Porter has never shown the slightest interest. He says she has the intellectual depth of a puddle." Emily lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I think Porter has been waiting for someone like you, someone he can actually talk to." The next morning, Adelaide packed her few belongings back into her traveling case and dressed in the cleanest dress she owned. Mrs. Garrett had insisted on mending the tiers and washing away the dust, and Adelaide looked considerably more presentable than she had 2 days ago. Her hands were nearly healed, the bandages replaced with lighter wrappings. The whole family gathered to see them off. Peter and Mr. Garrett shook Adelaide's hand and wished her well in her teaching position. Emily hugged her fiercely and made Adelaide promise to help with college preparation. Mrs. Garrett kissed her cheek like she was already a daughter. Porter loaded Adelaide's belongings into the wagon beside his mother's supply boxes. "Ready, as I will ever be," Adelaide said. The ride to Montana City took about 3 hours. Mrs. Garrett kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out other ranches, telling stories about the area's history, and occasionally making pointed comments about how wonderful it was to have an educated woman coming to teach the town's children. "We have been trying to convince the town council to hire a teacher for 2 years," Mrs. Garrett said. "Finally, they allocated funds and sent for someone. Education is the future. Without it, we are just scratching survival from the dirt. With it, our children can build something better." Montana City itself was larger than Adelaide had expected. It had started as a mining camp during the gold rush but had evolved into a proper town. There was a main street with a general store, a bank, a saloon, a church, a doctor's office, and various other businesses. Houses spread out in all directions, ranging from neat painted structures to rougher log cabins. The new schoolhouse sat on the edge of town, a proud building of fresh-cut lumber with large windows to let in light. Beside it was a small cottage, and Mrs. Garrett informed Adelaide that this would be her home. "The town provides housing for the teacher," she explained. "It is small, but it is yours, and the ladies' auxiliary has furnished it with basic necessities. We all contributed what we could." Porter pulled the wagon up in front of the cottage and jumped down to help Adelaide descend. His hands were strong and sure at her waist, and when she was on the ground, he did not immediately step back. "Welcome home," he said softly. Adelaide looked at the cottage, at the schoolhouse, at the town that would be her new life, and felt a mixture of excitement and terror. "Thank you for everything." "I will be back on Saturday," Porter said. "There is a dance at the church hall. May I escort you? I would like that very much." Mrs. Garrett was already at the cottage door with a key produced from her reticule. She opened it with a flourish, revealing a cozy interior with a pot-bellied stove, a table and chairs, a rocking chair, a bed with a colorful quilt, shelves for books, and cheerful curtains at the windows. "Oh," Adelaide breathed. "It is perfect." "It is yours," Mrs. Garrett said with satisfaction. "Now let us get you unpacked, and then I will introduce you to some of the important people in town. The minister, the banker, the mayor, and of course, Mrs. Fletcher, who runs the ladies' auxiliary. She is a bit of a battle axe, but her heart is in the right place." Porter brought in Adelaide's belongings and then, reluctantly, prepared to leave with his mother. At the door, he paused and looked back at Adelaide. "Saturday," he said. "Saturday," she agreed. After they left, Adelaide stood in her new home and tried to absorb everything that had happened. Less than a week ago, she had been walking behind those wagons, despairing, alone. Now she had a home, a job, new friends, and the beginning of something with Porter that made her heart race just thinking about it. The next few days were a whirlwind. Adelaide met with the school board to discuss curriculum and expectations. She spent hours in the schoolhouse, arranging desks, stocking supplies, and preparing lessons. The town's children would start attending on Monday, and she wanted to be ready. She also met many of the townspeople, most of whom were welcoming and excited to have a real teacher. A few, like Mrs. Fletcher, were initially suspicious of this young woman from back east, but warmed up when Adelaide proved knowledgeable and sensible. "You will do," Mrs. Fletcher pronounced after grilling Adelaide about her qualifications. "We need someone who will teach properly, not just babysit children while their parents work. You seem capable." Coming from Mrs. Fletcher, Adelaide learned, this was high praise. Saturday arrived sunny and warm. Adelaide spent extra time on her appearance, wearing her best dress and pinning her hair up carefully. When Porter arrived in the late afternoon driving a small buggy, she saw his eyes light up when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." Porter was dressed in clean trousers, a pressed shirt, and a vest, his dark hair neatly combed. He looked different than he had at the ranch, more formal, but his smile was the same. The church hall was already filled with people when they arrived. Music spilled out the open doors, and Adelaide could see couples dancing inside. Porter offered his arm, and Adelaide took it, feeling both nervous and excited. The moment they entered, conversation paused. Adelaide felt dozens of eyes on her and Porter. Then Mrs. Garrett swept over with Emily in tow. "There you are. Come, Adelaide, I must introduce you to everyone properly. And Porter, stop hovering. She is not going to disappear." The evening was wonderful. Adelaide met more townspeople, danced with several partners including Mr. Garrett and Peter, and spent as much time as propriety allowed with Porter. When he held her in his arms for a waltz, Adelaide felt like she was floating. "Is this too fast?" Porter asked quietly as they turned to the music. "Me courting you so publicly so soon, probably," Adelaide admitted. "But I do not care, do you? Not even a little bit." Porter's hand was warm at her waist and his eyes held hers. "People will talk, but they would talk anyway. Might as well give them something worth talking about." Over the next several weeks, Porter and Adelaide fell into a pattern. He came to town twice a week, always with a proper reason: delivering supplies, picking up goods from the general store, attending church. But everyone knew he was really there to see Adelaide. They would walk together through town, sit on her cottage porch and talk for hours, attend church socials and community gatherings. Porter was unfailingly respectful, never pushing beyond the bounds of propriety, but the connection between them deepened with every conversation. Adelaide discovered that Porter was more educated than many cattlemen. His mother had insisted all her children learn to read well and think critically. He had opinions on politics, literature, and social issues that surprised and delighted her. They debated women's suffrage, the Indian question, labor rights, and a dozen other topics, sometimes agreeing, sometimes not, but always respectfully. "You challenge me," Porter said one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. "Most women I have met just agree with everything I say, or else they do not care about these subjects at all. But you have your own opinions, your own mind. I like that." "Good," Adelaide said. "Because I have no intention of becoming agreeable just to attract a husband. I am not looking for agreeable, I am looking for real." Porter reached over and took her hand, a gesture that had become comfortable between them. "I am looking for you." Adelaide's teaching position was going well too. She had 23 students ranging from age 6 to 15, and while discipline was sometimes challenging, she found the work deeply satisfying. She was making a difference in these children's lives, opening doors to worlds beyond Montana they might never have imagined. Emily came to town once a week for what they called college preparation, but what was really advanced tutoring. Adelaide taught her Latin, higher mathematics, and essay composition. Emily soaked it up like a sponge. "Father is coming around," Emily confided one day. "He sees how hard I am working, how serious I am. Mother is working on him too. I think by next year he will agree to let me go." Summer deepened into August, and Adelaide's feelings for Porter deepened along with it. She knew now with absolute certainty that she loved him. She saw it in the way her heart leaped when his buggy appeared in town, in how she counted the days between his visits, in how right it felt when he was beside her. Porter had not said the words yet, but Adelaide could see it in his eyes, in his actions, in the way he looked at her like she was something precious and miraculous. One Saturday in late August, Porter arrived with an unusual request. "Will you come out to the ranch for Sunday dinner? The whole family wants to see you and Mother is insisting. Plus, I want to show you something." Adelaide agreed readily. She loved the Garrett ranch and she had missed spending time there. They drove out Saturday evening so Adelaide could spend the night in the guest room, just as she had that first time. The family welcomed her like she had never left. Emily showed off her latest essay with pride, Mrs. Garrett fed her enough food for 3 people, and even Mr. Garrett seemed genuinely pleased to see her. "You have been good for this family," he told Adelaide gruffly. "Porter is happier than I have ever seen him, and Emily is working harder at her studies than she ever did before. You are a good influence." After dinner, Porter asked Adelaide to walk with him. They strolled away from the house as the sun began to set, following a path Adelaide had not taken before. It led upward, climbing a gentle slope to a flat area surrounded by cottonwood trees. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Porter said. "When I was a boy, I would come here to think, to be alone, to dream about the future." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Adelaide, I need to tell you something." Adelaide's heart was pounding. "What is it?" "I love you." Porter said it simply, directly, his sage green eyes holding hers. "I have loved you since I lifted you onto my horse that day on the trail. Maybe that sounds crazy, but it is true. Every day since then, I have loved you more. The way you think, the way you care about people, the way you challenge me and make me want to be better. The way you light up a room, the way children adore you, the way my family has embraced you like you already belong to us." Adelaide felt tears prickling her eyes. "Porter, wait, let me finish." He took both her hands gently. "I know this is fast by some standards. We have only known each other a few months, but out here, we do not have the luxury of taking years to make decisions. Life is hard. Life is uncertain, and when you find something real and true, you hold on to it." He took a deep breath. "Adelaide Voss, will you marry me?" For a moment, Adelaide could not speak. Joy and love and certainty flooded through her in a wave so powerful it nearly knocked her over. "Yes," she breathed. Then louder, "Yes. Yes, Porter, I will marry you. I love you too, so much it terrifies me sometimes." Porter's face broke into a smile that was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, gentle and reverent at first, then deeper as Adelaide kissed him back. It was her first real kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed and more. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Porter reached into his pocket. "This was my grandmother's. Mother gave it to me weeks ago. Said she knew I would need it soon." He pulled out a simple gold band with a small but beautiful sapphire. "It is not fancy, but it is perfect," Adelaide interrupted. She held out her left hand and Porter slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they entered, they found the entire Garrett family waiting with barely concealed excitement. "Well," Mrs. Garrett demanded. Porter held up their joined hands, showing the ring on Adelaide's finger. She said yes. The family erupted in celebration. Emily shrieked and hugged Adelaide so hard she nearly knocked her over. Mrs. Garrett cried happy tears and kissed them both. Mr. Garrett shook Porter's hand with gruff approval, and Peter clapped his brother on the back. "Welcome to the family, Adelaide," Mr. Garrett said. "Officially, this time." They set the wedding for early October, after the fall harvest but before winter made travel difficult. Adelaide continued teaching while helping Mrs. Garrett and Emily plan the wedding. The whole town was buzzing with excitement. Their courtship had been watched with great interest, and many people had been rooting for them. A few people, like Sarah Jennings and her mother, were less than pleased, but Adelaide found she did not care. She had Porter's love, his family's acceptance, and a community that had welcomed her. That was all that mattered. The wagon train incident had faded into memory, though occasionally Adelaide would see someone from that group and feel a flash of old anger. Most of them had the grace to look ashamed when they saw her now, happily engaged and thriving. Mrs. Henderson, she heard, had been quite vocal in her disapproval of Adelaide's engagement to Porter, calling it scandalous and improper. But even Mrs. Henderson's opinion could not dim Adelaide's joy. October arrived with crisp air and golden leaves. The wedding was held in the church in Montana City on a Sunday afternoon. Adelaide wore a dress that Mrs. Garrett and Emily had helped her sew, ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Emily was her bridesmaid, and Peter stood up as Porter's best man. The church was packed with people from town and neighboring ranches. As Adelaide walked down the aisle on Mr. Garrett's arm, he had insisted on giving her away since she had no family of her own. She saw Porter waiting for her at the altar and felt like her heart might burst. He looked so handsome in his dark suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes fixed on her with so much love that Adelaide felt tears threatening. When she reached him and Mr. Garrett placed her hand in Porter's, it felt like coming home. The ceremony was beautiful. The minister spoke about love and partnership, about building a life together through hardship and joy. When Porter said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, and when Adelaide said hers, she meant every word with her whole heart. I now pronounce you man and wife. Porter, you may kiss your bride. Porter cupped Adelaide's face gently in his hands and kissed her, sweet and tender, while the church erupted in applause and cheers. They held the reception in the church hall, with tables loaded with food that the ladies' auxiliary had prepared. There was dancing and laughing and toasts to the happy couple. Adelaide danced with Porter, with Mr. Garrett, with Peter, and even with some of her students' fathers. But it was Porter she kept returning to, Porter whose arms felt like home. As the sun set and the celebration continued, Porter leaned down and whispered in her ear. Ready to go home, Mrs. Garrett? Adelaide loved the sound of that. Mrs. Garrett. She was part of this family now, officially and forever. Yes, she whispered back. They had decided to live at the ranch rather than in Adelaide's cottage in town. The cottage would be kept for nights when Adelaide needed to stay late preparing lessons, or when weather made travel difficult, but their real home would be at the ranch. Porter had spent the summer building them a small house of their own on Garrett land, close enough to the main house for family, but separate enough for privacy. As they drove away from the celebration in Porter's buggy, waving goodbye to family and friends, Adelaide felt overwhelming happiness. Her life had changed so dramatically in just a few months. She had gone from walking alone behind wagons, exhausted and despairing, to being loved and cherished, surrounded by family, doing work she found meaningful. "What are you thinking?" Porter asked as they drove through the twilight. "That I am the luckiest woman alive," Adelaide said honestly. "If you had not found me that day, if you had just ridden past instead of stopping." "I would never have ridden past," Porter said firmly. "Even if I had not fallen in love with you at first sight, I would have stopped. But I am grateful every day that I did. You have changed my life, Adelaide, made it better in every way." "You saved mine," Adelaide countered, "literally and figuratively. I was so lost before I came here. Now I feel like I have finally found where I belong." Their new house was lit with lanterns when they arrived, and Adelaide gasped when she saw it. Porter had hung wildflowers over the door, and inside the single room was cozy and perfect, with a large bed covered in quilts, a table and chairs, a stove for cooking and heating, and windows that would let in morning light. It was small, but it was theirs. Porter lifted Adelaide over the threshold, making her laugh and set her down gently inside. "Welcome home, wife." "I love you, husband," Adelaide said, reaching up to pull him down for a kiss. That night, as they lay together in their new bed, Adelaide thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. All the pain and loss, the difficult decisions, the long travel west, even the cruelty of the wagon train, all of it had led to this moment, to this man, to this life. "Thank you," she whispered to Porter in the darkness. "For what? For seeing me, for stopping, for choosing me." Porter pulled her closer. "Always," he murmured. "Always, Adelaide." The first year of their marriage was full of adjustments and discoveries. Adelaide continued teaching, driving into Montana City, 3 days a week in the buggy Porter had given her as a wedding gift. The other days, she helped around the ranch, learning the rhythms of cattle work and domestic life in a way that was new to her. Mrs. Garrett became the mother Adelaide had lost, teaching her everything from how to preserve food for winter to the best remedies for common ailments. Emily became like a sister, still coming for tutoring but now also spending hours just talking about life and dreams and the future. Porter was everything Adelaide could have hoped for in a husband. He treated her as an equal partner, valued her opinions, and supported her teaching career even when some men in town suggested a married woman should not work. He was gentle and passionate, protective but not controlling, and he made Adelaide laugh every single day. Their small house felt like a sanctuary. After long days of work, they would sit together by the fire, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's presence. Porter would tell her about the cattle and the land, and Adelaide would share stories about her students and their progress. In spring, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. Mrs. Garrett was thrilled, immediately taking Adelaide under her wing with advice and preparation. "You will be a wonderful mother," Porter assured her when she voiced her fears. "Look how the children at school adore you. Look how Emily adores you. You have so much love to give, Adelaide." Adelaide's pregnancy was relatively easy. She continued teaching through the summer, but decided to take a break when the baby came. The school board agreed to hire a temporary replacement, with the understanding that Adelaide would return when she was ready. In November 1877, Adelaide gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after Adelaide's father. Porter wept when he held his son for the first time, and Adelaide fell so deeply in love with this tiny human that it sometimes took her breath away. Life settled into new rhythms. Adelaide cared for Thomas, helped with ranch work, and slowly prepared to return to teaching. Mrs. Garrett was an enthusiastic grandmother, always eager to watch Thomas. Emily was a devoted aunt, reading to him and singing lullabies even though he was too young to understand. When Thomas was 6 months old, Adelaide returned to teaching part-time. It was hard to leave him, but she also needed the intellectual stimulation and sense of purpose that teaching gave her. Porter supported her decision fully. "You are not just a mother," he told her. "You are Adelaide. Teacher, thinker, advocate for education. Thomas needs to see his mother pursuing her passions. That is important too." 2 years later, Adelaide gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline after Porter's grandmother. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to hold her and help care for her. The house felt full and happy, chaotic in the best possible ways. Emily went off to college in the fall of 1880, the first woman in the Garrett family to do so. She wrote long letters to Adelaide, sharing everything she was learning and thanking Adelaide for helping make it possible. Adelaide kept every letter, treasuring them. As the years passed, Adelaide and Porter's love only deepened. They weathered harsh winters and droughts, cattle losses and financial pressures, the challenges of raising children and building a life. Through it all, they remained partners, facing everything together. Adelaide never forgot that day on the trail when Porter had lifted her onto his horse. Sometimes, when life got difficult, she would think about that moment and remember how it had felt to be saved, to be seen, to be valued. And she would look at the life they had built together and feel overwhelming gratitude. Thomas grew into a thoughtful, serious boy who loved books as much as his mother. Caroline was bold and adventurous, always climbing trees and riding horses before she was really old enough. Adelaide taught them both to read early, instilling in them a love of learning. In 1882, Adelaide gave birth to another son, Samuel, completing their family. With 3 children, the small house Porter had built became cramped, so they built an addition, expanding it into a proper family home. The ranch prospered under Porter and Peter's management. Mr. Garrett retired gradually, content to let his sons take over while he enjoyed his grandchildren. Mrs. Garrett continued to be the heart of the family, organizing gatherings and holidays that brought everyone together. Adelaide continued teaching, though as her children grew, she reduced her hours to spend more time with them. She never regretted choosing to balance both roles. Teaching gave her purpose beyond her family, and her family gave her joy beyond measure. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Adelaide and Porter would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, just as they had on that evening when Porter proposed. Their children would be playing in the yard, their laughter ringing through the air, and Adelaide would feel such complete contentment that it almost overwhelmed her. "You ever regret it?" Porter asked one such evening. "Marrying me, staying here instead of just teaching in town. You could have had a different life." "Never," Adelaide said firmly, taking his hand. "This is exactly the life I was meant to have. These children, this place, this is everything I ever wanted, even before I knew I wanted it." "I thank God for that wagon train," Porter said. "I know that sounds terrible considering what they put you through, but if they had not been cruel, I would never have found you." "I thank God for you stopping," Adelaide countered. "You could have ridden past. Most men would have. But you stopped, you saw me, and you changed everything." They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, watching the sky turn gold and pink and purple. Thomas came running over with Caroline chasing behind, both demanding their parents' attention. Samuel toddled after his siblings, determined not to be left behind. As Adelaide scooped up her youngest child and Porter caught the other 2, tickling them until they shrieked with laughter, she thought about how far she had come. From that lost, dusty woman walking behind wagons to this. Wife, mother, teacher, beloved member of a family and community. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Thomas proved to be naturally gifted with animals and spent more and more time working with his father and uncle on the ranch. Caroline shocked everyone by announcing at age 12 that she wanted to be a doctor, and Adelaide made sure her daughter had every opportunity to pursue that dream. Samuel was musical, with a beautiful singing voice that filled the house with melody. Emily graduated from college and returned to Montana, where she opened a school for girls in Helena. She visited often, bringing stories of her students and her work advocating for women's rights. She never married, declaring herself perfectly content with her independence and her work. Peter married a quiet woman named Catherine who fit into the Garrett family seamlessly. They had 4 children of their own, and the ranch became even more full of life and laughter. Mr. Garrett passed away in 1890, peacefully in his sleep. The whole family mourned him, but they also celebrated the life he had built and the legacy he left. Porter and Peter officially took over the ranch, running it with the same dedication and integrity their father had shown. Mrs. Garrett lived to see all her grandchildren grown. She passed away in 1898, surrounded by family, holding Adelaide's hand. "You have been the daughter I always wanted," she told Adelaide. "Thank you for making my son so happy." Adelaide wept for days after Mrs. Garrett's death, mourning the woman who had been mother, friend, and mentor. But she took comfort in knowing how full and rich Mrs. Garrett's life had been, how loved she was by everyone who knew her. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread and brought her home to the Garrett Ranch to help run the cattle operation. Caroline did become a doctor, one of the first female physicians in Montana. She married a fellow doctor, and they opened a practice together in Billings. Samuel became a music teacher, bringing culture and beauty to a part of the world that desperately needed it. As Adelaide and Porter grew older, they often reflected on the life they had built together. Their small house had grown into a compound of buildings housing multiple generations of Garretts. The ranch had expanded and prospered, employing dozens of people. The school where Adelaide had taught for decades had grown from a one-room building to a proper institution with multiple teachers. "We have done well," Porter said one evening. They were in their 60s now, their hair streaked with gray, their hands worn from decades of work. But they were healthy and happy, surrounded by children and grandchildren. "We have done better than well," Adelaide corrected. "We have built something lasting, not just the ranch or the school, but a family, a legacy of love and hard work and treating people with dignity." Porter pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I still remember that day I found you on the trail like it was yesterday. Best day of my life, seeing you standing there in all that dust and deciding to stop." "Best day of mine, too," Adelaide agreed. "The day my real life began." In 1905, Adelaide and Porter celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party that included what seemed like half of Montana. Their children threw it for them, and people came from all over to celebrate. Former students of Adelaide's, now grown with children of their own, shared stories about how she had changed their lives. Ranch hands talked about Porter's fairness and integrity. Emily gave a speech about how Adelaide had made her college dream possible. As Adelaide looked around at the crowded room full of people she loved and who loved her back, she thought about that frightened, exhausted woman walking behind Wagons 30 years ago. That woman could never have imagined this life, this love, this legacy. Porter found her at one point during the party and pulled her outside for a moment of quiet. The June evening was warm and beautiful, just like that evening so long ago when he had asked her to marry him. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" Porter asked, pulling her into his arms. "Not in the last hour," Adelaide teased. "You are getting lazy in your old age." "Old age," Porter scoffed. "We are not old, we are experienced." Adelaide laughed and kissed him, this man who had saved her life and then made that life worth living. "I love you too. More than I have words to express." "Show me instead," Porter murmured, and Adelaide did, kissing him with all the passion and love that 30 years of marriage had not dimmed but only intensified. Their later years were peaceful and rich. They traveled some, visiting Caroline in Billings and Samuel in Denver, where he had moved for a better orchestra. But mostly they stayed at the ranch, content with the rhythms of the land and the comfort of family around them. Adelaide finally retired from teaching at 70. Her body no longer up to the demands of managing a classroom full of energetic children. The town threw her a retirement party that lasted 2 days. Former students came from all over Montana and beyond to honor the woman who had taught them not just reading and arithmetic, but how to think critically and dream big. Porter retired from active ranch management around the same time, turning over daily operations to Thomas and his sons. But he could not stay completely away from the cattle. Most mornings, he would still ride out to check on the herds, and Adelaide often went with him. They would ride together through the land that had been their home for so long, remembering all the years, all the changes, all the moments that had made up their life together. "You have any regrets?" Adelaide asked him one morning as they sat on their horses overlooking the valley. Porter was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then he shook his head. "No, not a single one. Every choice I made led me here to this life. How could I regret any of it?" "I am glad," Adelaide said, "because I do not have any regrets either. Even the hard parts, even the losses and the struggles, they were all part of the journey, and the journey was worth it." In 1920, Adelaide and Porter celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary. They were in their 70s now, their bodies slower but their minds still sharp, their love still strong. Their children arranged a small family gathering rather than a big party. All 3 children came with their families, and the house was full of grandchildren, and now a few great-grandchildren. As Adelaide sat on the porch surrounded by her family, she reflected on the long arc of her life. From Ohio to Chicago to that wagon train to this moment, every step had been part of a journey she could never have imagined as a young woman. She had experienced loss and cruelty, but also overwhelming love and joy. She had made a difference in hundreds of children's lives through her teaching. She had built a family that would continue for generations, and through it all, there had been Porter. Her rock, her love, her partner in everything. The cowboy who had stopped when he could have ridden past, who had lifted her onto his horse and changed both their lives forever. That night, as they lay in bed in the house they had shared for 45 years, Porter pulled Adelaide close. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For saying yes. For taking a chance on a cowboy you barely knew. For building this life with me. For being my Adelaide." Adelaide turned in his arms so she could see his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. His sage-green eyes were still as beautiful as the first time she had seen them, perhaps even more so now, filled with decades of shared memories and enduring love. "I would do it all again," she said. "Every single moment exactly the same." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Porter Garrett." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, Adelaide Garrett." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Porter passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1923 at the age of 72. Adelaide held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering that she loved him, that she would always love him. She was heartbroken but also grateful. They had been given 48 years together, far more than many people ever got. And what years they had been, full of love and laughter and purpose. Adelaide lived for another 7 years without Porter, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She spent her days reading, working in her garden, and telling stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. Her grandchildren especially loved hearing about how she and Porter had met, about the wagon train and the cowboy who stopped to help a woman in need. "It was like something from a story," her granddaughter Mary said one day. "So romantic." "It was romantic," Adelaide agreed, "but it was also real. The best love stories usually are. They are built on small choices, daily kindness, commitment through hard times. The grand gestures matter, but it is the everyday love that builds a life." Adelaide passed away in her sleep in the spring of 1930, in the house Porter had built for them so many years ago. She was 76 years old. Her children were with her at the end, holding her hands and telling her how much she was loved. As Adelaide drifted away, her last thoughts were of Porter. of the day he had found her on that dusty trail and offered his hand. Of all the days that followed, the joys and sorrows, the ordinary moments and the extraordinary ones. Of the life they had built together through love and work and unwavering commitment to each other. She was buried next to Porter in the family cemetery on the ranch, under the cottonwood trees with a view of the mountains. Their children made sure the headstones reflected who they had been. Beloved parents and grandparents, pillars of their community, partners in life and love. But more than that, Adelaide and Porter's legacy lived on in their descendants, in the ranch that still bore the Garrett name, in the school where Adelaide had taught so many children, in the values they had instilled in everyone they touched. Kindness, hard work, integrity, and the belief that every person deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. The story of the cowboy who stopped to help a woman walking behind the wagons became legend in Montana City, told and retold through generations. It became a symbol of what was possible when someone chose compassion over indifference, when love was given a chance to grow, when two people committed to building something lasting together. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all, not just the family they created or the work they did, but the example they set of what true love looked like. Not perfect or without struggle, but real and enduring and worth every sacrifice, every hard choice, every moment of doubt overcome by faith in each other. Their great-grandchildren still live on Garrett land, still tell the story of Adelaide and Porter, still look at their portraits hanging in the family home and marvel at the love story that started with a simple act of kindness on a dusty Montana trail in the summer of 1876. A cowboy who stopped. A woman who said yes. And a love that lasted not just a lifetime, but through all the lifetimes that followed. A testament to the power of choosing to see another person's humanity and acting on it with courage and compassion.